Good waste is waste which can be dealt with by the environment and can be reused. At the same time also is creating some level of economic value.
Hello. Welcome to the Good Garbage Podcast. My name is Ved Krishna. My primary reason for existence has been to find ways to leave our wonderful planet cleaner. We will be speaking with material innovators, creators, and propagators to learn from them how we can build for scale and towards a regenerative future. Their stories will help us answer the big question, what is good garbage? David Walker and I go back a long way. We met in the late 90s when he was leading Southeast Asia for Afry, the largest consulting organization for the industry. We interacted a couple of times since then, until recently when we caught up at Rethinking Materials earlier this year. And it was an absolute delight to know that he was investing in and guiding young companies in the biomaterials space. His vast experience and insights will be of significant value for the industry as a whole. I immediately requested him for a recording, and he has made an exception for us as he usually avoids to be in the limelight. Funding, and probably the right kind of funding, is the lifeblood for any organization, young or old. It becomes even more pertinent when it is a startup in a space that has not caught enough investor attention. David, through this conversation, provides deep insights and ideas for positioning, preparation, and pitfalls as well. We are fortunate to have such wisdom amongst us. Enjoy and learn. Hello. I have an old friend on the podcast today, and David Walker, the founder and partner at Cowry Capital, UP Forest Industry Global Growth Fund, board member in numerous startups. And David and I have known each other for maybe over 20 years, David, right? Like
it's making us both look old a bit. So yes, it's been a long time. I think I came to Singapore in '96, so it was around that time. So long time.
Yeah, so David was, of course,
great to be here.
Yeah, and you've been instrumental in the pulp and paper industry, and then, of course, subsequently started up various things on your own. So I'm excited about this conversation and excited about catching up. But one thing we have never talked about, David, is your growing up. Where did you grow up? How did you decide to choose the direction that you did?
So I was born in New Zealand, actually. I then went to university in a place called Wellington, which is the capital city of New Zealand, at Victoria University. During my last period of time at the university, I met this rather lovely Finnish lady who is still my wife today after she's tolerated me for coming up to 37 years of marriage. We met in the mid 83, 84, and she convinced me to come to the tropical paradise of Finland. So I moved from New Zealand to Finland in 85, and the story starts there because I was doing some work in the forest industry back in New Zealand, so as a forest industry analyst. Then I came to Finland to join a bank. The bank had a big position in the forest products industry in Finland, so we were doing a lot of lending to the forest products industry. We were doing a lot of advisory work around the forest products industry. So I joined the bank, and after about 5 years, I was asked to join a company called Jaakko Pöyry. Pöyry is still today, although now it's called Afry. Pöyry was one of the biggest forest products industry consulting engineering groups in the world. So with them, I spent as much time outside of Finland as I did in Finland. I was in South America, in around Europe, in the United States, etc., working with forest products companies on different sorts of projects and both greenfield type investments as well as investment type analysis. And I spent altogether sort of 19 years with Pöyry. I spent a lot of time in South America, and then I moved to Asia in '96 and to be responsible for the Asia business for Pöyry. And again, that was a super interesting experience, both for the family and and for me, we really enjoyed living in Singapore, and of course, I was on the airplane, and that's where I met exciting people like you. So we had a really nice time. After 19 years with Pöyry, I decided that I needed to get back into finance and banking. So I spent a bit of time with Macquarie, running their global forest products advisory business, and then I decided to set up my own consulting business, which was a bit of a leap of faith, but I really enjoy doing that. It's nice to be responsible for your own destiny. And then I came back to Finland in 23 to help set up this fund that we'll talk about. It's been a boring life in only the forest products industry, but I really enjoyed it and met some super people. One of the things that I always say about this industry is that the people that you meet are just genuinely nice people, really nice people, very great experience, great ethos of work, and genuinely, I think, despite sometimes the bad rap, I think genuinely care a lot about things like the environment and how the impact that the industry has on the global environment, and coming from a very down to earth, real type thing, growing trees and then transforming those trees. So it's a really, I really have enjoyed my career and still enjoying my career in the industry.
So total digression. So what is this about Scandinavian women? They find men. I have so many friends who have moved to Sweden and Finland thanks to not so much Denmark, interestingly. Maybe I'm missing out on those.
No, we
But
get ourselves in trouble if we.
Swedes and Finns, I've found
Swedes
that
and Finns.
they tend to get men from all over the world into their country. So what is it
Well,
about Scandinavian women? Let me
I
learn
think
this firsthand.
what's nice about Scandinavian women is that they, I think, are very down to earth, very smart, and calm. I've got to say, I'm perhaps the opposite. So perhaps one of the reasons my wife and I have been together for so long is we make a great compliment to each other, that that I'm a bit volatile and she's very calm. So we have a nice balance in our lives, and we have two great kids. So I have my son is currently living and working in the Middle East, and our daughter is here in Finland. So we have a nice little unit to keep together. But
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I would
I'm
not.
not sure what the recipe of their success is.
Yeah,
But I
you
always
haven't
I
answered
always
my
say,
question.
yeah, exactly.
Maybe in Helsinki over a drink is when I get to know, and
I
maybe
think that's the.
at least you've said good things about your wife. So I hope she will listen to this podcast, and you'll get some brownie points at least. But I would have never in my life, in the few times we've met, never thought of you as volatile. I would always
Well,
think of you as even keeled, calm, kind of mature, head on the
exactly.
shoulders kind of
Well,
guy. So I'm
it
glad you
depends.
told me that. I'll be more careful in the
It
future.
it depends upon the topic, exactly. So I think I have a fairly high energy level, but on the other hand, also so when I sometimes, I must admit, you want to see things happen a lot faster than sometimes a lot faster than they actually happen. So that drives the angst sometimes. No, but otherwise all good. And back to your question on Scandinavia, I think there is part of it is, and what's so interesting is when I moved from New Zealand to Finland, you'd sort of say those two countries obviously literally are polar opposites, right? But actually, there's a lot of similarities. New Zealand has obviously quite a strong agricultural industry. Finland has a very strong sort of forest-based industry. I think the people are sort of fairly down to earth and sort of realistic in terms of what can be achieved. And I think so. Actually, I drew surprisingly a large amount. I felt sort of quite. Of course, you have a bit of anxiety moving from one end of the world to the other, but actually living in Finland has been quite a really sort of great part of my life, because it's in a way, and I think culturally it's not so crazily dissimilar to life in New Zealand, which is good. So.
Yeah, lots of thoughts there. So one thing you don't know about me was my parents took a camper van and they spent maybe over a month or two in New Zealand, and this is way back, maybe even late 80s or early 90s. And they knew that I was very outdoorsy. I wanted to just climb mountains and go
Yep.
down fast rivers and stuff like that. And they told me back then, and maybe even 80s, they told me, you need to go to New Zealand.
Yep.
And it took me a while. I, in fact, even had a dream that I'll, open an outdoors company in New Zealand. Of course, there's dime a dozen there, but but
Yeah,
I wanted
sure.
to pitch in, but I never ended up doing. But one thing that actually struck me as you were speaking about both countries, both are such pristine natural places, of course.
Mm, mm.
And my wife and I eventually did travel and spend a month in the South Island in a little town called Lumsden. I have no idea
Oh,
if you know
Lumsden.
it.
Okay, I've been to
Yeah,
Lumsden. Exactly.
you have? Okay. Because we couldn't afford Queenstown. It was too
Yeah, yeah, that's
expensive,
true.
right? It's
Exactly.
so
Well,
crazy.
Queenstown's a bit too
So,
touristy. Exactly.
yeah, but at least Lumsden was in the center, so we could go both directions and, like just
Yeah.
drive around. But it was so pretty. So coming back to, so my question to you is that, like I'm sure the influence of nature has been strong. Like growing up in
Mm,
New Zealand, living in Finland, it is
mm.
so stunning. The natural beauty is so stunning. Have you thought about, your choice of ideas and how that may have influenced, the choices that you make today?
It's a really good point. I think it does have an influence actually, because I think you sort of and sometimes I think people talk about and think about environment as being a sort of very abstract thing, right? I mean, you sort of sometimes you will talk about sort of environmental policies on this or that or the other. In reality, it's sort of what's around us. Are you comfortable with the air that you're breathing when you walk outside? Is it clean? Is the lake water that you're, in the case of Finland, we're lucky enough to have a summer place, which isn't too uncommon in Finland to have a place out in the countryside and surrounded by a forest and by a lake and things. It's great to walk. My daughter is hugely sort of focused on the the energy which comes and the calm which comes from walking in a forest. So being in a forest, swimming in a freshwater lake, all those things, they have a huge impact on the way that you view life. I mean, I am a bit of a city person. Right? We've lived in Singapore, and we've lived in Helsinki. I've lived in Buenos Aires, in South America. I mean, we've been all around to all the big cities of the world, but still, when you sort of return to the peace and calm of a forest, I think that does influence the way that you think, and I think it influences back to the comment New Zealand and Finland. I mean, I think it does influence the way that people, behave in a society. That calmness which comes from a clean natural environment, I think has a really huge impact on the way you think about it. And I think the Finnish and the New Zealand at a government level, but at a personal level, in business level, they want to try to give that message, right? I mean, protecting environment is not some sort of random thing that they do, right? They really genuinely want to want to try to help other countries on that same journey. Finland and New Zealand have a massive advantage, unlike most of Southeast and most of Asia. They have a massive advantage. There's only 5 million of them living in a huge country. I mean, I think that that of course has a big impact. That you have a small population base and a big geographical base. It gives everybody space. It gives everybody a chance to be calm. It gives everybody the opportunity to engage with nature in a great way. So I having not thought about it, but I think it does have a bit of an impact on how you see life.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure. And you talked about forest bathing, and it's we don't think about it so much, especially
no,
when we've grown up around forest, but it does have such an influence. And of course, there has to be a reason why Santa chose Finland, right? So the Swedes can keep fighting, but he came
They'll never
from,
win that
yeah,
fight.
he came
Exactly, they'll
from
never win. But
Finland.
I
That's where
think
he lives.
Rovaniemi has been one of the most
Exactly.
successful places for. I mean, I think now during the winter time, the population of the population base of northern Finland almost doubles and triples and quadruples as a result of all the people coming to visit Santa Claus. So yes, absolutely. We've all got to believe in Santa Claus because it's otherwise it would be silly not to. We're acting against our own interests.
Absolutely. And
So,
I finally, this winter, the last winter, I finally got to do digging a hole, getting into the water,
oh,
and
nice.
going back to a sauna. So, and it was so incredible. It was in the ocean near Helsinki,
Yeah.
but
You're a
it
braver
was
man than
stunning.
me. I've done it. My daughter used to do this, and I would look at this and go, "No, I think I don't mind going swimming in a cool lake and then diving back into the sauna, but cutting a hole in the ice is one step too far as I'm concerned." So,
Well, somebody else did cut the hole for me. There was a sauna place. So I didn't actually have to cut the hole. But yeah,
yeah,
but I had to do it, right? This is the thing.
yeah.
I've been going to Finland for so many years, but I said, and imagine this, there was a Mexican guy with me.
Oh no,
And
really,
that man was just like, I am not, you are
not doing
crazy.
that.
I
Yeah,
am not
exactly.
doing that. But he got, after we did push him, and there was a Finnish guy, me, and the Mexican guy, and we did push him. And he went the maximum number of times after that. He was
Oh,
like, my
well
gosh,
done.
this is
Okay,
so
see,
good.
see, I
So
always knew you were good on you were good on sales, and so therefore you've done a good job on the.
my team would
Good.
not agree with you, but that's a conversation for another time. Let's switch to Afry because, of course, there is so much learning, and I think lots of the listeners will not know about Afry and the kind
Yep.
of strength it carries. It is really an institute, I would say, in the industry, and having whatever it is, 500 consultants and 16,000 engineers or something like that is a crazy number, and just so focused on the forest and energy kind of business. It is remarkable when I look at Jaakko Pöyry or Afry now, what they have built. So I would love for you to kind of talk to us a little more about the organization itself, and more than that, the learnings that came for you through working with them for 19
Sure.
years and being
Sure.
exposed to these large forest companies.
Yeah, sure. No, look, I mean, again, I left Jaakko Pöyry back in 2006 already. But I stay in touch with the team, and what's so interesting, right, is, and when I joined, so Dr. Jaakko Pöyry, who founded the company and was always the inspiration for people like me joining. He was truly an entrepreneur and built this business, this engineering consulting business from nothing. And as you say, it became, and I think probably still is today, I think the leading consulting engineering group in the world. That comes from, I suppose, a number of things. It comes from obviously the experience base, right? So if I think to myself, I could, in joining, and because let me tell you one funny story. When I joined Pöyry, of course, I came from a bank, right? So of course, I turned up in a suit and tie and looking the part, and I walked into this. I walked into the office. In those days, it was sort of closer to central Helsinki, and one of my engineering colleagues sort of said, who I had not met before, sort of said, oh, who are you and what are you doing here? And I said, well, I've been doing forest products industry banking for the last sort of 5 or 6 years. And Dr. Pöyry thought that it would be a good idea that we build up this part of advisory, part of our business. And the guy looked at me and sort of said, honestly, I've got no idea why we would need a banker in our company. So I thought, well, okay, this was day one of welcome. But it got better. It got better. But what I think what that said was we had quite unique expertise around engineering and design. But it went much beyond just that. It went to sort of understanding, okay, so what's the economic impact of all the things that you're doing? What are the so inbuilt in everything we did, and you called them feasibility studies and pre-feasibility studies and blah blah blah. At the end of the day, you were there to create an optimal engineering solution which also generated returns for shareholders. And I, of course, was very much on that side of the proposition. And I think that's still the culture today. It's all about creating the optimal engineering solution. And now today, an optimal solution, not just from a technical perspective, but from an environmental performance perspective, and then from an economic perspective as well. And that took me to all sorts of. I mean, one of the other things, if it's sort of say that experience base and competence and technical competence base, the other thing which I think was quite impressive was Pöyry in those days, and probably still is today, I think one of the most international companies in Finland. Right? I mean, we were everywhere. I mean, we had offices. I mean, I ran the Asia business. We had offices throughout Asia. We had a great network in South America. We were in probably the weakest part. We perhaps was we were in North America, but not particularly well known. I think we were always regarded as being the Scandinavian spies by the Americans. But I think we had a great presence throughout Europe, and it was that global reach that you could draw upon the experiences that you had in one part of the world and apply them in other parts of the world. I honestly feel that Pöyry in those days and Afry today, really has quite unique competence, which takes this Scandinavian view of the world in terms of environmental performance, in terms of technical competence, in terms of the view of returns and economic returns to shareholders. It takes that view globally. It takes that expertise globally, and I think it's a great institution. I think when we lost Dr. Pöyry, I think we lost a lot. Right, he was the driving character. It's different to be a publicly listed company than it is to be a private company, and we all have views on that. I was mentioned personally. There was a history of Pöyry written, and I was mentioned in that book, which was more of a life history of Jaakko Pöyry, and which was something like it was a little bit like this New Zealand guy turned up and joined this Finnish company, and it was quite a fun story about how I had come to join Pöyry in those days. But yeah, so I think a very good institution. I've been away, as I say, for a long time, but still have deep respect for the team.
The one thing that I presume you didn't do, and as a good Kiwi you should have done, and this is a quote unquote should have, is that you should have worn that shorts, half t-shirt, half shirt, and a tie.
Yeah,
like a good Kiwi banker. You can go to a summertime bank in New Zealand, and you'll see people in the shorts, shirt, and a tie. Then that would have been fun for them.
I never went that far, although I will say the dress code of some of the engineers in Pöyry was sometimes quite surprising. So we often had, particularly when you would go into a more formal setting in some meetings. So you're right. Summertime in amongst Finnish engineering guys was also the same short sleeves, which I must admit I never extended to. So I was a bit too formal.
You had your British roots intact.
That's true.
Over the generations.
True. That's very true. Over the generations.
And you clearly lost your Kiwi accent as well at some point.
I lost it. Although for some words, some people can still figure out I'm from New Zealand with some words, but I must admit I have, because I haven't lived in New Zealand now since '85. So that's sort of 40 years. And I've also lived in many different parts of the world. And of course you pick up accents.
Absolutely. Yeah. You didn't pick up a Finnish one, clearly.
No, although I speak fluent Finnish. And so I'm quite proud of the fact that...
that would have scared me about moving to Finland. That's a tough one.
That was a tough one. Back in the mid '80s, also it was English was not so commonly spoken in Finland. Today, of course, a lot of people don't actually learn Finnish. I made a determined effort to learn Finnish at the very beginning. So I thought that if you're going to understand this country, you've got to understand its language as well. So I'm proud of the fact that even though we spent 25 years away in Singapore and Asia, I still retained my Finnish language skills, and so I'm happy about that now that we're back. So all good.
And I'm sure your wife's family is at least happy about that too.
That's true,
you can be included. Okay, let's jump to Why entrepreneurship? You've been in a good job, you've been to Macquarie, and of course, you were in a very senior position with a lot of responsibility. So, what made that happen, and why did you choose to set up an investment company? Or maybe there was a different transition.
Yeah.
So would love to hear your story of choosing to be an entrepreneur when
Yeah.
you did.
I had to sort of and really thoroughly enjoyed my time in Pöyry, and of course Macquarie was another big institution that had very strong ethos and things. I think it was funny. I made this decision to set up first my own advisory practice, and then sort of help drive this fund. I wanted to experience. The reality is that when you're in a big institution, of course, you feel you have a contribution to make, etc., and you do. But when you're on your own, it's only you, right? It's all about, So I would always go, I always go, well, I think my clients really valued my view. I think they valued my view. I think they appreciated my advice. They appreciated the sincerity with which that advice was given, etc. But but still, you're under a label, right? Which is, you have a brand called Pöyry, and as we just talked about, quite a successful brand. But when you step out into your own company, it's sort of, there is no brand, it's just you, right? And I genuinely wanted to test that theory. I wanted to test whether, in fact, was the advice did my clients like me because or appreciate me because of the brand, or because of the advice I gave. So that was really the major drive for me to step away from Pöyry. Was a bit of a self-fulfillment. I think I started Pöyry, and I started Cowry Capital, my advisory company, and Cowry, by the way, is the name of one of New Zealand's most prestigious trees, right? So it's known for its longevity. It's known for its strength. So I deliberately chose that name to go back to my New Zealand roots. But Cowry was all about it, sort of testing whether I could survive on my own, and started that in 2010, and 15 years later it's still going. So seemed like it worked. But then, and so I've continued to keep my advisory work, because there are certain clients that I deeply appreciate, and they appreciate me, and so we work together on a few sort of selected assignments. But then when I sort of set up the fund together with one of my old Pöyry partners, so a guy called Rainer Hegblom, who headhunted me into Pöyry way back in 1989 or 1990. He had the idea of creating an innovation fund, and he asked me to join. And then we recruited a couple of other guys, another colleague from Pöyry in those days, and another colleague that I knew from Pöyry's investment banking activities. So we sort of formed a team to start this fund. And again, that was a new entrepreneurial experience. First time in my life, I had to run around asking people for money, which I genuinely didn't like, to be honest, because I couldn't understand why they wouldn't give it to me, because I told them they should. So I went on the sort of the fundraising stint, but then most importantly, I focus within the fund on the investments we make. So I'm chair of the investment committee, and I lead the analysis, supported by a great team of people. I lead the analysis work that we need to do from an industrial perspective to help, and I think where we sort of earlier on talked about to help sort of companies, startup companies, new entrepreneurial companies, to sort of face the realities of sort of the industry that they are in, right? So I think what's crucial about our fund is that all of us, the whole team, has quite a solid understanding of the industry. And therefore, when you're talking to a startup who generally has got a great idea, but doesn't necessarily have a lot of connectivity to the industry, we're trying to bridge that gap. And we're trying to bridge that gap in terms of understanding what should cost bases look like, what should scale up opportunities look like, what are the more specific applications of that technology, etc. We're trying to sort of bridge the technical gap, financial gap, sort of mental gap that exists between a typical entrepreneurial small company and then sort of this big industry that they're part of. And I think my own, so back to the sort of the question, I think my own entrepreneurial experience, to a certain degree, I think helps with that, right? Because you sort of you've started a company from nothing, and so when I'm talking to an entrepreneur who started their company, I can appreciate what they're going through and try to help them also on that journey. So I think my own entrepreneurial experience somehow can help and does help some of the startups we work with to appreciate and to to see what they're going through, and I can help them, just in terms of help them get through some of the things, because it's not easy, right? I mean, today, there are a lot. First of all, there are a lot of startups, even in this narrow space that we're working in biomaterials. So there's a lot of great ideas, and it's a matter of translating the great ideas to a commercially viable business. Sometimes I look at some of these businesses and sort of go, okay, you've got a great idea, but there's so much more work to do around making it commercially viable. What's so funny? The world of VC and the world of sort of startups is quite a new world for me, right? So again, as you said, I've been coming from a big industry, so it's a bit of a new world. And the thing which I always remember, which sort of shocks me, was they go, okay, we're losing this much money. We're only losing this much money per month, right? And I go, I started my, from day one, and I'm not being egoistical, but I mean, from day one of my little consulting company, I always made money. It would have been a complete sort of disaster if I had to feed my family. So it was me feeding my family, right? So I couldn't make a loss. It's just ridiculous. So sometimes this world of startups where people talk about, we're only losing hundreds of thousands or millions of whatever. I just don't relate to this idea that you're losing money, right? Because if you're losing, okay, I appreciate there's always a bit of a time lag, but I think we've got to encourage the startup world to be a bit more realistic about that, because when the real world of business guys come, when the industrial world comes and says, essentially losing money is a failure. You read the financial press as much as I do. Company ABC lost XYZ. That's not a good message, right? So I think the financial discipline of the startup world needs to be I think rethought. I think I'm often accused of being far too conservative, but I just think we're in the business of making money at the end of the day. We want to have a great environment impact. We want to bring great products to market. But at the end of the day, we've got to make money. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, they say the first part of sustainability is to sustain yourself. If you don't sustain yourself, there's not going to be much sustainability coming out,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
And another wise man once told me, revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is reality.
I think that's
India, and I come from similar to you in thinking, but we come from what they call the business caste, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So there it's an absolute, exactly what you said, without cash in your box, there's not much that is happening. So it baffles me as well when people talk about, and people sometimes come to us and say, take this burn capital. And I'm like, what the heck is burn capital?
Exactly. Well,
I said, no, just spend it and it'll blow up the whole thing, hire this influencer and that's going to make this. I said, but I don't have the supply chain if it does blow up. So how am I going to, I'm going to kill my business if I'm not able to provide people with the material they need. This is the only amount of material I have and I can't create it overnight. It's an industry, it needs to be set up, etc. So it's always been a challenge.
I think your point about this thing, as you say, burn rate, right? I go. Well, first of all, we all know burning's a bad thing, especially as it concerns waste. So burning's a bad thing, and to me, a burn rate's a very bad thing. So you got to minimize it as much as you can. So again, I always appreciate there is timing differences, right? You've got to invest time, effort, etc., in order to grow the business, and so I 100% understand that. I think sometimes what I try to say to the companies that we're working with is we need to be thinking a bit smarter, and bluntly think about what cost bases are necessary to achieve outcomes. And then at the same time, also, we need to compress the timelines, right? We can't be, we often get approached by companies or sort of startups, and also bluntly, within sort of parts of large corporations that are sort of there's a lot of innovation stuff going on in small companies, and they sort of talk about, we'll only reach scale in, if I just take 2025 as the base year, we'll reach scale in 2028 and 29, and then we should be making a bit of money by 2031. Which I go, well, good luck with that, right, guys? I mean, I think if that's your mindset in terms of when you're going to get to commercial success, then far too, I regard myself as a long-term thinker, but I mean, but you do have to take on stages of and progress to commercial reality. I think if you're going to create a sustainable business, it has to be sustainable not just in terms of environment, but also economically. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
No, totally. I completely agree with you. So let's again go back to your starting Cowry Capital. What were the initial aims? What was the real purpose that this is what we are going to try and serve? And how much of that has been retained, and how has the company transformed from there? Is it more or less, okay, I decided I'm going to do these 5 things and this is what I do? Or was it started with a different kind of thought process, mission, and we kind of transmuted into something else? How much difference do you see?
Cowry Capital has been a big part of my life, right? So, I've been doing it for 15 years and continue to do it. It was always very simple, right? I just wanted to be recognized as somebody who can help companies, whether they're big companies or small companies, in their transition, in understanding and making investment decisions. I think that was the crucial part of it. And investment decisions were all about greenfield plants and brownfield investment decisions, but also particularly around sort of acquisitions and sort of call it transformational company experiences. And as I said, I did most of that work with large companies, but I tended to do it with entrepreneurs. So obviously, we have some number of mutual friends in India, a lot of Asian. I tended to try to focus a bit on working with owners of businesses, because in a way, when you're dealing with an owner, it's sort of his or her decision, right? So it's sort of, in a way, you're dealing with a person who's putting their own, they have their own literally sort of skin in the game. I always found that the most rewarding. So I was fortunate enough to work with a bunch of entrepreneurs in China, despite my miserable Chinese language. I have some great friends in the rest of Southeast Asia and South Asia, India, and the same thing to a certain degree also in Europe. I tended to work with family-owned or privately owned companies, of course, as well as the big guys, so the big publicly listed groups. But I must admit, I always enjoyed working with the private companies or the family-driven companies, because you could develop a strong trust relationship, and you were actually there helping them think about how they would get returns from their own personal capital in most cases. I found that very rewarding, actually. So actually that mission really, or that, I'm not arrogant enough to call it a mission, but I mean, that sort of plan, was really the plan from the beginning. And I really, I enjoyed that very much. And I think still today, that's what I like doing. Of course, I get involved in, big M&A transactions or with big companies. And there you tend to be dealing with the management, etc. But you're dealing with very senior management. And so you're dealing with people who think like owners, basically. And I think that's the most crucial thing about this, is you can never have too much gap between, at the end of the day, the shareholders and the management, right? So you have to have a management. I think one of the things that I always look for in management teams is these managers think like owners. I mean, they're really thinking about this as being they're spending their money. Yeah, so I enjoy doing that work, and actually when you're then dealing with in the startup world now, under with our fund, you are dealing also. It's the same thing, right? You're dealing with owners, right? Generally, the founders have got a big stake in the game, so you're dealing with those founders. It was sort of their idea, or a group of them, their idea. It's their drive, their commitment, their energy, their effort, which is going to turn the company into a success. I've actually found sort of my work that went on again, sort of back to what we talked about as an entrepreneur starting up my own advisory business, working with family type companies, this move into working with entrepreneurial startups is actually quite similar in a way. A lot of just different scale, of course, but different. And I found the sort of the work that I did and the enjoyment of working as an advisor, and then moving into this sort of startup world has been really enjoyable.
So, how much of the work today is the older background in forestry versus the new age biomaterials? Because I see you being on the board of a lot of great startups, and of course, I think that probably creates a lot of value for them. But if you look at your entire mix of consulting, especially, how much of it is in the traditional forest products where you kind of really spend time, versus new age kind of businesses
Yeah.
which are coming out with new products?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. That perhaps has been the biggest change, right? That you're rethinking a lot of your historical assumptions. I think that's what's because obviously the forest products industry, always did thing in a particular way. The Pöyry background was all about scale. It was all about economies of scale. It was all about efficiency of production, la la la. It was, so it was like a train or a machine, just there's basically. Where of course the new biomaterials space is quite different, because it's all about innovating around the fringes and taking some of those historical assumptions and turning them upside down. And so if you think, for example, I'm working with a company, and I was actually just at the Prima conference the beginning of this week in Prague. I mean, talking and on a panel talking about new biomaterials. And what was that? What's interesting, Prima is an industry group for big industry, but then represented in that grouping was a bunch of biomaterials companies, a couple of which we're invested in. And so what was interesting about that is, those companies are challenging the way that the big industry thinks. And that's super exciting. There's lots of challenges, right? I mean, good example. I mean, I think, we're invested in a company which makes barrier coating materials out of seaweed. And then another one invested in making barrier coating materials out of agricultural waste, one based in Germany, one based in the UK. Then you sort of talk to the traditional industry, and they go, oh, plastics, we're very happy with plastics. Plastics does everything for us. Plastics are cheap. Plastics give us shelf life. Plastic, blah, blah, blah. And you guys come along and tell us we should think about other biomaterials. And one fellow who I won't name, but sort of said, so I'm happy to think about your product as long as you give me 1-for-1 on cost and performance vis-a-vis what I'm doing today with plastics. Maybe not so popular, such a popular, I said, in the event, well, we need to be honest with ourselves, right? That's not going to happen in the short term. We may get there, but if your aspiration is only to look at new things, new biomaterials, if you can achieve 1-for-1 cost parity and 1-for-1 performance parity, then you're actually saying that you don't want to change, right? So what I said is, this is a journey, right? And you can't achieve the economics of the plastics industry as a startup. That's just not, the plastics industry has been running around for, and effectively a lot of the plastics industry, it's a byproduct. It's almost, so it's a byproduct. So it's not, you could even argue it's not, of course, it's not priced in terms of its environmental impacts. And one may even say it's not even priced in the context of actually the true value of what it takes to get there, because you're using side streams from other processes. So my experience in this big industry and dealing with bringing these startups to that industry is quite interesting, because I sort of go, I'm sort of always regarded as being a bit of an industry insider, right? So I've advised some of the biggest companies in the world and in the industry, and so they regard me as sort of somebody that they know well. And then you have this David Rockefeller bringing this startup shaking the tree, sort of, excuse the pun, shaking the tree type company. And that's quite exciting, but it's not without its challenges. And I think the biggest challenges really are, I regard this as a chicken and egg problem, right? These companies are going to take a bit of time to get to the volume that they need to achieve true economies, to get to price points which make them comparable, and at the same time the journey of quality or characteristics, that will also change. But a lot of them are showing extraordinary promise. The two I mentioned, Traceless in Germany and Notpla in the UK, they've got massive potential, and they're doing some really exciting things, and they're doing that together with the industry, but they're doing it together with some industry participants who are innovators, who want to change, who genuinely want to change. And that's, I suppose, what I'd say for the industry overall. You've got to genuinely want to change. If we keep on, and I said at this conference, let's just stop this comparison to plastics. Let's just, if there's one call to action I would have for the industry, is let's just stop making this comparison to sort of say, oh well, plastics does this, and you need to achieve that result. You need to achieve the same result at the same cost. Let's just forget that comparison, because it's just not realistic. What you should be saying is, what can these biomaterials do for me? What can these biomaterials do for me in different sorts of applications? And the answer is, they will not meet all the aspirations and all of the requirements, right, of the plastics industry. That's not the plan. But in certain applications, and in certain rather big applications, they can make a difference, and they can actually even be better, in my view, and not just from an environmental perspective, but from many perspectives. So let's just be, stop making the comparison and figure out how we can, where are these biomaterials going to be most relevantly applied, and just go for it and build economies of scale in that area, and with that, use achieve not just a great environmental result, but also a great economic result for both parties. And so that was my call to action on Tuesday of this week, which was big industry. You need to change. You need to also think about redesigning processes, right? Another crazy example, there was one speaker mentioned, we have to have, very long shelf life. I appreciate, for a number of products, you've got to have really long shelf life. But it got to the ridiculous situation that one again unnamed company said, we're making fresh sandwiches, and we have to ensure that the shelf life is more than 7 days. I go, well,
not very fresh.
if you're a fresh sandwich maker and you want me to eat a 7-day-old sandwich, you must be out of your mind, right? But of course, their response was, but that's what the specification said. To which I say, well, change the specification, right? So there's a lot of work around redesigning of processes that is necessary as well. So you've sort of got to work, and that's often done at these, but it's done at the product specification level. You sort of need to we need to sort of stop saying, okay, here's what I do with plastic, and therefore you biomaterials guys, you go and do the same thing. Right? That's the wrong thinking process. It's to say, what do I need to have to protect my product, to give it, the shelf life it needs. What sort of barrier properties do I need? What do I, and let's get back to some fundamental, and using my back to Pöyry days, right? Let's get back to some fundamental re-engineering of processes and redesign to achieve what we want to achieve in terms of characteristics of a protective package or a sachet or whatever. Let's get back to fundamentally understanding what we're trying to achieve and design a biomaterials product which can achieve that. And for some things it'll work, for other things it won't work, and for other things. So therefore and I think also the one thing I keep on advising the startups that we're working in is let's just get rid of this language is that, we're in a fight to the death with plastics. We're not in a fight to the death with plastics. There's lots of things that we shouldn't be using plastics for, right? There's a huge amount of things we shouldn't be using plastics for. But in certain applications, plastics is a fantastic invention and it serves its purpose. But there are a whole bunch of areas that we can create biomaterials which have a much lower environmental impact and a lot more sustainable, they can be better product characteristics. Let's focus on those things. I hope that message gets across. Let's cut this whole, we do it this way in plastics, therefore you need to do the same thing. And let's stop this sort of plastics equivalency is what the end goal is. Plastics equivalency is not the end goal. Designing great products made out of biomaterials, that's the goal. And at the same time, protecting the environment, stopping the outrageous amount of microplastics which are entering the ecosystem. If I was to be worried about one thing, and I'm coming up to sort of 60, I'm 63 years old, right? So I don't have too much, but my kids and my little grandson, they've got a life ahead of them. We should be very concerned about the amount of microplastics which is entering all parts of the ecosystem, all parts of the food chain, because bluntly, the current ecosystem just doesn't know how to deal with them. I mean, it's just bluntly. I mean, there are numerous scientific studies which show exactly. I mean, the ecosystems don't know how to deal with microplastics, and that means they're going to spit them out somewhere, and that's not going to be good for us. My whole industry to new technologies is a transition, and it's a transition which I hope I can bring the sort of the positive thinking of the industry to these startups, but at the same time also also make sure that innovation keeps on happening and that we actually have real change. And so if I want to sort of think about myself, I'm trying to participate in the debate, which is trying to help the industry be a bit more, call it risk orientated, and a bit more sort of open to how they can make new ideas actually work. And then at the same time, helping the startups try to understand that world and be a bit more down to earth sometimes. That's the role I hope I can play. That can be far too arrogant. That can be far too arrogant, by the way. I don't want to sound arrogant at all. And I mean, but that's the role I'm trying. That's the role I'm trying.
No, and it's an important role because you're right. Sometimes the bigger companies are not seeing the benefits of the innovation, and the smaller companies don't understand the overall business ethos. I'm going to actually ask you for some very personal advice, considering what you talked about a little bit, and I'm going to get this advice from a ex-Pöyry guy and his own capital, thanks to this podcast, because otherwise that would have costed me a pretty packet. So one of the things that is constant that I hear, that we've actually gotten it into our heads that anything sustainable is going to cost more and perform poorer. Now that I find really challenging, and I try to work with our innovation team to say that if you are trying to think of any product as a replacement for another product, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot, because what happens is that your bar is already set. You're never going to exceed that bar. You're always going to try and hit that bar, right? And probably
Exactly.
stop. And exactly what you were saying. But of course, there are practical challenges, right? There is a certain amount of structural integrity that comes with the years of effort that the petroleum polymer industry has built. How do you think I should structure the conversation so that we are able to push beyond our mind space, right? If you think about it, plastic is a wonder product that came out of some waste and, of course, has totally transformed humanity. Well, not humanity, the whole planet, right? And in good and bad ways. So that said, if we had it in us as humans to create that product, I'm sure we have it in us as humans to create more optimum, I wouldn't call it better or worse, more optimum performing products at an optimum cost. So because price again is everything is in comparison, right? Price is, in isolation means nothing. So, you compare with what is there, and you're right. We also compare the performance specs based on what is there, and that may or may not be needed. So how should I structure an influencing conversation where I'm able to push across this idea that don't put a bar there, that I'm trying to compare with what is there. Let's try and solve the challenge on a first principles basis, that something needs to be kind of packaged and then transported and then consumed. And, that's what it is. So how does one do that? How would you do it?
Well, so I think the point that you're making is exactly correct, right? If you just get trapped into this one-for-one comparison, it's a lose-lose because you don't look for different ways. And one of the things I always try to, again, you and I are both old enough to I mean, I started, after school every day, I would go and work at the corner dairy, right? At the corner, like a corner small grocery store, serving people and wrapping up goods, right? And there wasn't plastic to be seen, right? And again, I mean, that's not that long. I mean, okay, I said I'm old, but it wasn't that long ago, right? I mean, so we've done it once, right? We've made this. We were living in call it a paper world. We lived in this paper world. So I would go, I would be wrapping up meat or wrapping up, putting things in a bag or whatever. Yes, you had canned goods. Of course you had canned goods. You had glass. Everything was in glass. You didn't really have, you didn't really have too much. So you had sort of, so we've made this transition once, right, from paper to plastics. Why on earth can't we then go, well, we can also make it, away. Again, that's not saying we want to have the end of all things plastic, because again, plastics has various benefits. But there are an awful lot of areas that we don't need to have, and particularly around this whole single-use plastics. I mean, what a completely stupid idea. You go to your fruit store and you stick everything in a plastic bag, and then you carry the thing for 5 minutes. Carry the thing for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, however long home, and then you take out your fruit or vegetables or whatever, and then just throw the bag. I mean, what on earth level of stupidity do we have that we need to do that? I mean, if we're too lazy, and I think this is, by the way, it's not just this comes down to a lot to consumer behavior. And I must admit, my habits have changed quite a lot as I've begun to be more and more. So I never go. I never go to a grocery store, or whatever. I never take a plastic bag. I generally always have my own bag, like my own little. Okay, if there's, if I've got too much stuff, I buy a paper bag I think we just got. We have to change. We have to change as consumers, and that will cause the industry to change. So I think a lot of this comes from us needing to change. A lot of it comes through what we just talked about, redesigning of some processes, thinking about what the actual packaging requirement is. And if we all the time think about that in terms of okay, well, this is what the plastic thingy did, so therefore I'll replicate that. That's a losing fight, right? Because at the end of the day, plastics are cheap and easy, and if you're lazy and don't want to think about it, then just keep on consuming plastics. But then live with the consequences, right? So what we should be talking to brand owners and converters about is, okay, you can go ahead and do that in plastics. By the way, what we should be doing is trying to build in and understand the real costs of plastics, not just in terms of the production costs, but what the environmental impact costs are, and start. I said on Tuesday, I'm essentially a free market capitalist, right? I'm not a huge fan of regulations, but when something is just grossly mispriced, as plastics is, in terms of its environmental impact, then we've got to start slapping taxes on plastics, as long as those taxes, and here's always the crux of taxes, as long as those taxes are going back to create environmental benefits, right? So not disappearing into the ether to pay off debt. So let's be very realistic about what the true costs of plastics are, but recognize also we have to re-engineer processes. So we need to be a lot more creative about re-engineering. And again, we've done it before, right? We re-engineered the things that we were doing with paper and re-engineered and created plastics. Why on earth can't we do that again? Right? We just re-engineer our way back, to other solutions. And we're a lot more informed today than we were 40, 50 years ago. Plastics was invented well and truly before that, but I mean, just in terms of massive use. I mean, plastics in all the forms that we're talking about, particularly in packaging, hasn't been around for so long that we can't rethink our way out of that process. I think it's just, there's an element of, I hate to say it, sort of intransience. And so what I'd say to your team about this is exactly what you just said, which is stop thinking about equivalency. Think about what you need to try to achieve. Think about how you need to achieve that with the optimal, you will have to redesign processes. And let's start on that journey of redesign. We did it already, paper to plastics. We can do it again, plastics to paper, or plastics to other biomaterials. Today we use a much wider range. Again, I mean, what's exciting, we're using seaweed, right? Who would have thought, we're going to use, it's like, if we think about my expertise in the forestry space, seaweed is like this giant underwater forest, right? We've got, massive scope for a very cost-effective raw material. Fantastic that we're thinking, who would have thought we would be using seaweed to figure out how we can package things, right? Or the same thing, we're as the fund, we're focused a lot on waste streams. So one of my other sort of passionate things is burning fiber must be the really stupidest idea possible, right? I mean, turning wood streams into burn them. I mean, why on earth aren't we? I mean, okay, we're going to have some residues left over after we've extracted, but just keep on extracting until until you've sort of got almost nothing left. Using waste streams, agricultural waste streams, seaweed, other forms using waste streams gives us a very cost competitive, at the end of the day, very cost competitive raw material to play around with. I'm not at all convinced that we can't close the price gap, but it does require also between plastics and other materials. But it does I think genuinely require that we recognize what the intrinsic cost, the true cost of those plastics are on environmental. It's crazy. We have all these rules around the forest industry, right? We have all these rules around costs of certification of forests, costs of managing forests, sustainability, which are all I 100% agree with. 100% agree with. We've got to maintain the integrity of our raw material base in forestry, and we have almost no rules around the environmental costs of plastics. That's not a fair playing field. Right? I mean, we're ignoring all the environmental impacts while we're certifying and implying all these additional costs to what is essentially a sustainable growing raw material base. We're imparting lots of costs on these guys, and we're implying no costs from an environmental perspective on the plastics guys. Unfair, unjust, completely wrong. Needs to stop.
Yeah, we need to have you at a lot of government forums, David. This talk needs to go out. I hope that we'll get it to some people. Two comments, and then I want to shift gear and then have you wear your investor hat on a little more. One is, of course, you said, the time plastic has been around is typically about 80 years and ish. And I keep telling our team that, we say that the most basic of plastic bags or polyethylene bags will take about 500 years to degrade. Nobody really knows. But okay, let's assume that that's true. That first bugger still has 420 years to go, right?
Exactly.
So that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And you talked about the fiber and as a fuel, and I just find it again, similar to you, not the best of ideas, because in our case we use agri residues and bagasse is mainly used as a fuel, and it's a terrible fuel. It has 50% moisture,
very inefficient.
And it has whatever something like 1800 kilocalories, compared to even a dried agri residue or a biomass. So, but yeah, I guess it's a captive residue for the sugar mills, and hence they do it, hence they burn it. But of course, I'm sure there is a quid pro quo that can happen where you use a different fuel and you pass on that raw material for other usage. But I'm going to pivot and I'm going to ask you for your investor hat. We would like to take a minute to thank our sponsors. Good Garbage is sponsored by Packer, a family of brands that produces compostable packaging and works to implement regenerative solutions. Packer's new project is to bring compostable food serviceware and food carry products to the North American marketplace. Learn more at packer.com. Now back to the conversation. If you look at companies, what is it that you're looking for? And, just before we started, we talked about the audience, and the audience is a lot of people are looking to get into sustainable packaging or their early startups. So if we are to inform the listeners that if you guys want to come to Cowry Capital, these are few things that are really important for David and the company to look at.
First of all, I look at, essentially you're looking at the quality of the idea, right? So of course, that's how are you going to fit into this ecosystem? Are you doing something different? A lot of people come to us with ideas which aren't necessarily so different. They think that they're different, but they're not necessarily so different. So I suppose it's the differentiation. One crucial part is differentiation of the idea. Second part to me is passion, dedication, focus of the people. I think of a lot of the companies that we invest in, we're looking at how passionate the people are. And of course they're all, I mean sort of passionate often in a business sense, not in an American MBA textbook sort of sense. Just are they driven to really take? Because this is, for startups, this is a long, hard fight. You have good days, you have bad days, you have multiple bad days, and you have a good day. You need a lot of internal strength and passion to take this forward. One of the rewarding things of what I do and our team does is work with some outrageously exciting and interesting and dynamic people. I mean, if I just have this, if the one reward that I'm getting now in life is actually being with some of the people that I'm with, because it's so exciting to working with younger people, and at the same time also with very passionate people. So often that's a very easy box to tick, but it's really crucial because this requires a large amount of tenacity to drive for startup. And then the third element, and this may sound a bit sort of harsh, but But actually, the third element to me is just sort of common sense, and I emphasize cents or euros or or whatever currency, in the way that they, are a bit conscious of where they're spending money. It's back to what we talked about earlier, which was the revenue is great, cash is what counts. We want to see a dose, an element of reality in the thinking process. And we often coach sort of the startup, the people that we're working with around that sort of sense of reality. You do have to be conscious of what you're doing with the money that you've been entrusted. And I use that word. You as a startup entrepreneur have been entrusted with my funds, our funds money, or other funds money, or private individuals who have worked very hard to either give our fund money or you directly money. You've been entrusted with that money, right? You've got to look after it, right? You've got to be making. So I look for that technical differentiation. I look for the passion, but I also look for the sort of the common sense associated with, am I conscious of how I'm looking after the money I've been entrusted with. On that last point, I would say there is quite a scale, right? Too many people, and it's great to have aspirations, but too many people go, oh, well, Spotify or Amazon or ABC, major tech company, they spend this much money, and they went from zero to hero, so we can too. And yes, I think the context of what we're doing in biomaterials industry is a bit different than that technology. Yes, possibly, but you do have to be conscious of what that journey looks like and how you're going out spending money. So that sounds rather boring, and I know perhaps isn't necessarily a popular message, but I do think it is important to recognize you're a steward of capital as well as a proponent of great ideas, and you need to take that also seriously.
Oh, that's great. I think it's three very clear kind of messages, and that makes it easier. One of the things we recently started was we realized that we have a strong R&D center in Bangalore, India, and we've invested a lot of money in these millions of dollars in these equipment, right? There is like a biomaterial lab, there's a biodegradation lab, there are these Macquarie barrier testing equipment, which are again very expensive. And we realized that, we kind of keeping it limited to ourselves. And we said, we need to open this up. We need to get a lot of people in. And we've just started that. One other thing that we look for, and we said, come in, even if it's not of commercial interest to us, it's okay. Come and use our lab. At least the equipment gets used. Okay, there's a little wear and tear, but what's it doing sitting there? We are using it. Some of the equipment we are maybe using once a month, right? So it's useless. So we said, okay, let's start bringing people in. And of course, it's just starting, and it's starting to generate ideas. One other thing that I always try to do, and I don't know if that's the right strategy, but when we are choosing the companies, and when they say that, oh, we want to come and work in your lab, the only one other question we ask, is it scalable? So that's the only other question kind of I add, and I suppose that might also be something that we look at.
100%. And by the way, great. I mean, it's a great initiative what you're doing in terms of opening up those resources, because actually, that's the point, is that having access to the right testing equipment and the right environment is crucial for all these startups, and it's really silly if they are trying to sort of do that all themselves. The one thing I'd add, I mean, and 100% agree with the scalability question, right? And that's part of what I sort of mentioned in the beginning of the three things, which is this technical viability. That's also to do with scalability. I mean, is this product going to be technically viable, and can you therefore scale it to success? back to the whole sort of sharing of resources thing. What's interesting is all startups, because it's a competitive world, right? The startup world's a very competitive world. All startups go through the phase of saying, "Ooh, I own this. I've developed this idea. It's of course a unique idea. Nobody else has done this ever before. Therefore, I can't cooperate with too many people because it's my idea and I got to protect it. And I'm going to spend a fortune on lawyers and IP guys to spend on putting intellectual property protection around this. Again, important, but in the right areas. Yeah. So it's sort of like this sort of, it's my idea. I want to make sure I protect it. Yes, to a certain degree, but also recognizing that a lot of these companies can also learn quite well from each other. So one of the biggest challenges the industry has is, little startup comes along and says, "I've got this great idea, and I think you should. I want to work with you on it." And the industry guy says, "Oh, great, happy to. Let's begin to test and explore." And they go, "Oh, no, I can't. So like, I can't tell you about my idea, I can't tell you what I got. I got, and it's sort of like this. There is this outrageous, and of course, then the industry guy goes, "Well, I mean, what do you want me to do, right? I mean, so there needs to be a little bit more sort of openness sometimes. So I think sometimes the startups are so protective of what they have. One thing I would advise, back to what we said before, one thing I would advise startups to not spend so much time on what I would describe as the fluffy PowerPoint pitches, right? I think I know I know this industry quite well. And if I get a deck, which can be beautiful, right? I mean, God knows how much sometimes they spend on making these beautiful, although the cost of doing that's declined a lot. But I mean, still, time and effort to make this beautiful presentation, which sort of says very little. And then, of course, always at the end are a fantastic set of financial projections, which means the company will be making a fortune, or growing at least. Maybe not making any cash, but I mean growing. So I just say let's get a bit less ambitious about the beauty of the PowerPoint, and let's get more facts, data. And for people like us, it's super important to understand what it is, and that's how we can make a contribution. Because we can see a lot of ideas, and then we say, "Hey, guys, this is being done already," or yes, that's a strength, but you're going to face this problem that you need to resolve, or but you can't do that without substance. And so one thing we also look for, as well as maybe we add this in the middle category, not just a lot of passion, but a lot of substance. And so less fluffy PowerPoint packs, more substance.
Yeah.
And willingness to share and contribute.
In the Jeff Bezos parlance, no PowerPoints. he uses a six-page. You have to write it down, and it's a six-page kind of concept note. No PowerPoints. Or as you and I used to have in my father's office, I could only enter with a one-pager. So,
I agree.
I had to give him a one-pager first. Yeah. Not more than one pages. If you can't say it in a page, then don't tell me. Make it concise. I don't have the time to read.
This reflects the fact that you and I are old, right? I mean, it's the same thing. I am used to writing things. I think I'm reasonably good at writing things. I think I'm used to writing things because because when you write something, it gives you the clarity of thought, and you need to be able to put together a logical argument. I agree with you. I'd love to see less PowerPoints, less writing. Pictures, more written logic.
And I also think, in my experience, PowerPoints are typically outward facing. You're trying to impress somebody. When you write, you are a little more internal facing. What do I really think? Because I have to write long form. So I have to think and I have to express. So I feel that, at least in my case, when I'm writing, then that kind of challenges there. The other thing I wanted to comment on, in my experience, most of the protectiveness actually comes from when we know less. That's my impression. And this can go back to, again, our vintage. Well, I consider myself young, so
Me
but still
too.
our
Me
vintage.
too. Yeah, me too. Me
The
too.
old days, they wouldn't let you enter their mills,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah,
have
yeah,
so much to
exactly. Exactly.
protect. And
Exactly.
eventually, when I did enter the mill, I was like, what were you
What's so
protecting?
special?
Like,
Exactly.
and what am I
Exactly.
really going to see inside your refiner and your chemicals? And, I'm just going to walk around and maybe talk to a few people. I might definitely learn a few ideas, but the devil is in the detail. Like, I
Yeah,
have no idea what is the methodology or what is the tackle you're using in a refiner and stuff like
exactly.
that.
I
And,
agree.
how are you controlling your consistency and your chemical flow?
I agree.
Those are not things that I'm going to learn by watching. It will
No,
have to be a process of really
doing.
deep learning,
And
which we'll all have.
yeah.
So one follow-up question to what you were talking about in terms of what you're looking for in companies. I'm reversing it. All the companies are looking for some investment dollars, but they're not just competing in the biomaterial space, right? Your
Yeah.
capital may be focused on
Yeah.
biomaterial, but there's a lot of funders who play the whole space, maybe at least of sustainability. And what I find is that, say, the energy side or the carbon side has become way sexier. So teach us on how a biomaterials company should pitch so that it's equally sexy in comparison to an energy or a carbon space company, somebody who's capturing carbon from the air or something like that, versus a company that is actually creating materials out of seaweed is actually equally important, but I find that it's not really provided its due. So how would you suggest, apart from return on investment, how should they structure themselves that they get that much attention too?
Yeah. Look, it's a good question, and I'm not sure I have the complete answer. I think you're exactly right. Right, certain industries go through different phases of being very sort of popular with capital, and you're right. Right now, carbon energy is because of the energy crisis that Europe has faced, and also because people sort of are really thinking a lot more about carbon. I personally, on the carbon front, think that there's quite a lot of hype associated with what's going on, and I think we'll probably come to some sort of reality. There's an awful lot of work to be done before we begin to find the right, sort of call it, price point and the right mechanisms for addressing the carbon issue. But that would take another few hours to talk about that. On the biomaterials side, I think it is an issue of addressing real problems, and I think the financial world is quite smart at figuring out, is this a real problem or isn't it, and therefore, and that you put it all in this thing called addressable market, but it's actually more to sort of say, am I dealing with a real issue which has growth potential to it? And for us, there's a massive amount of, I mean, again, it's all, we only invest in biomaterials, so we only invest in biomaterials as it relates to packaging, as it relates to biochemicals, and as it relates to building processes and building equipment. So just those three areas. To make those ideas sort of sexy, I think they have to be relatable, right? They have to be addressing a real issue and relatable. So in the packaging front, what makes that relatable? And I talk a lot to people about, I think you'll be familiar with the industry, which is basically the unboxing experience, right? I think that's a very relatable idea. I buy something online or at a store, it arrives in a big box, and I begin to unbox it. So what do I find? If I have, copious quantities of plastic lying around my living room floor, together with polystyrene rubbish all over the place,
Peanuts. Yeah.
peanuts, and if I have just even if I have just outrageous amounts of board and corrugated board and my unboxing experience isn't particularly, and to me that reflects on my experience vis-a-vis the brand. Again, just this very small microsystem, to your point of saying that's a very relatable issue. And if we're talking about then if you're in that sector and you're pitching, I think you've got to make the pitch of your idea just a relatable. How are you solving a very specific issue? So my point about making biomaterials sexy is it has to be relatable, because it actually, I mean, we all on a day, from the moment, we go to the fridge and pull something out and get consumed from the moment we wake up until the moment, as we're consuming things, we are all the time interfacing with some form of packaging or some form of sort of product interaction. I think that is quite, to use your term, I mean, sexy. I mean, it's quite relatable. I think a lot of companies, a lot of the sort of startups that are operating, we're in the right area. We're in a consumer facing, in a lot of cases, we're in a consumer facing world. And so making the idea relatable to what we're experiencing, I think that, in fact, actually, to be honest, should be an awful lot more clear than carbon. Carbon is a very difficult thing conceptually to understand, right? I mean, you sort of, you can't see it because we're told, but look, what's going on, and this is not political, I mean, what's going on in certain parts of the world, around belief or non-belief and in those sorts of things. I think my unboxing or my interaction with packaging is a lot more easy to understand than, and so I think so. My advice to startups is keep that idea that you're promoting as simple as possible, so the simple people like me can relate to them, right? That's the
advice of a sage.
not at all. Not at all.
So the other one. So again, looking at the other side. So of course, I find investors also getting attracted, especially in the hydrogen space, energy space. Now, things keep shifting. What would attract more investors? How would you get more LPs into the space and, getting more funds into your fund, as well as overall, how do more investors get attracted to the biomaterial space? Because that again changes the whole trajectory of an industry. If there is money flowing in, there is a higher chance of innovation speeding up too. So what should happen from maybe the investees side so that more investors want to come into the space? And of course, there have been debacles like any other industry where people have put in money and lost money. Has that dissuaded the investors? Or do you think it's too early? How do you see the situation?
I think people find, for example, the plastics sort of what we talked about before, solving some issues, big mega issues like that. They find that very relatable, and investors find that topic very relatable. And so, therefore, that's been a crucial. I think if I think about the biomaterial space, what's been the biggest driver over the course of the last few years has been bluntly everybody's recognition that plastics is a big issue, and Sir David Attenborough or Lord Attenborough, I think it is, was crucial in the raising of awareness around that topic, and that created a big movement of capital to try to address that issue. And so we're by no means unique in terms of our fund focus on this area. Some people have even more sort of niche. We feel we're quite niche. So other funds are even more niche in terms of focusing just on that whole plastics issue. So that's been a big draw card for. I think the issue that everybody struggles with, whether they're giving us money or giving companies money directly, is the point that you made, which was scalability. So can this idea become economically, can it actually make it? Let's put it in simple terms. Can it make a difference? Am I doing something which is nice to have, bit nichey, or am I doing something which can fundamentally make a difference? And I think that's the thing which most investors struggle with. It's the path to scalability. Now, there are lots of barriers. The intransience of the brand owners, the some brand owners and some converters and some parts of the industry, that in transience is one of the inhibitions to scale. The investors have got an awful lot of convincing to do that you can actually achieve that make a difference type phenomenon. But I think a lot of investors are getting there. And again, I would say plastics has been a crucial part of that, getting investors to understand the space. Other areas are a little bit more niche-y, right? I mean, other areas sort of, we should be using, forests, to be honest, and the use of more, call it the use of more wood. It's a very difficult topic, right? Because you have a large environmental movement, in some cases perfectly justified, saying that, there are lots of bad actors in that forestry space. And so there's lots of, but on the other hand, also there are lots of very good actors in the forestry space, and sometimes I think we're too focused on the bad actors, and not enough focus on the good actors. There's a lot of and at the end of the day, we're utilizing a resource which is growing. It may grow faster or slower. It may have, and back to the carbon thing, it may absorb more or less carbon, all these sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's a sustainable, growing resource which has positive societal impacts. It has positive, where we started, health impacts. I think at least it has positive. It has lots of positive impacts, and we tend to, unfortunately, and again, this may be not such a popular thing to say, but I think sometimes we've been a bit hijacked by the negative environmental messages around forestry, and we're forgetting the really good messages. Again, that's not saying there are not bad actors. That's not saying that there are not rooms. That's not saying that there isn't room for improvement. But fundamentally, the resource that we're dealing with in forestry is a very positive resource. But even for us as experts in that industry, it's sometimes quite difficult to sort of figure out, okay, so we want to use more wood, for example, much lower environmental impact than cement and ceramics and all those. We want to use much more wood I think we all sort of get that that's a positive thing, but actually that message is surprisingly difficult to get across because of the environmental sort of positioning. So I think some messages like plastics are very easy to get across to investors and to people in general, and there it's more an issue of, can I make a difference? Some messages around sort of raw material resources like forestry are a bit more difficult to get across. I think then we've got scope, a lot of scope for improvement on that
messaging
area
itself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So let's get to common sense, as you called it. And of course, you're also in the business of common sense. And, I'm sure your investors look for returns as much as they look for impact. So how do you see it? Yes, you've chosen the biomaterial space. You have a long, rich history personally to understand the space. Like you said, your youth is intact, talking to the startups
Yep.
and hanging out with younger people. So, all that aside, but let's come to the common sense part of it, because your investors would want returns, and they would ideally want, if not better than similar returns as any other investor, right? Who can be investing in real estate for all they care, right? So how do you ensure on your side that you are generating the right return for your investors, so that, we in the industry have people like you who continue to invest in biomaterials.
Yep.
So I'm sure you have your common sense hat on.
Yeah,
And
sure,
how do you do
absolutely.
that? And are you able to generate the returns that the investors would like?
Yep. So first of all, I'd say we're a new fund, right? So the proof will be in the proof will be in the pudding. So I suppose that will be comment number one. But I think this is exactly it, right? So first of all, back to what I said earlier when I said sort of startups are entrusted with capital of investors. Likewise, funds like ourselves are entrusted with capital from our investors, and we take that outrageously seriously and bluntly. Before I started this, I didn't have gray hair. I mean, I had hair like you. My father had very gray hair from a very early age. I think I inherited that trait. That trust keeps me awake at night a bit to to make sure that we are actually delivering. And so in order to achieve those returns, obviously we've got to have a disciplined investment process. We've got to believe in all the things we've just talked about. We've got to believe in those things. Those things are actually going to happen. We've got to work like crazy to make sure they happen. And importantly, we also have to have a level of discipline. We've made so far 6, and we only have. Let's face it. And I continue to be very modest about this. I think we're one of the biggest funds in Finland in general. I mean, one of the biggest, but we're a small fund, right? So we have 115 million euros. I mean, it's not a lot of money for our first fund, but we were a first bunch of guys, and we started this off. I hope with our subsequent funds or my partners will continue to be even more successful than that. So we're quite small. But it's all about, but for example, to give you an idea, we've looked at something like 250 plus ideas in the course of the last couple of years, right? And we've made 6 investments. So to tell you why this element of trust and in trusting us with capital is partly also about the discipline of our investment process. So you need to be disciplined in this space, because there are a lot of great ideas. Some of those great ideas are a bit early for us, so we want to try to help sort of ideas that have been a bit more developed technically as well as commercially to grow, rather than take what is a typical sort of venture capital route, which is give lots of money to lots of people and hope that 1 or 2 of them work, right? Which is a typical VC model. We tend to be more deploy a large amount of capital, be active with the company, dedicate the time and effort to that company, which means that you have to be quite disciplined about this. So will we generate the returns? Time will tell. We think we will. We think we have got, at this stage, we're going to make probably, the life of our investment period ends in a couple of years, and we'll probably deploy the remainder of the fund in probably 3 or 4 more opportunities. So part of something I learned, another element of my career, which was working with a very large scale investor, was concentration, and so not trying to do too many things makes an awful. So we want to do invested in a smaller amount of companies, invest intensely with those companies, work intensely with those companies, and that's the way that we think we can generate returns, because we can bring the expertise that we have to those companies and do that on an active basis, rather than sort of just turn up at the occasional board meeting. We're 24/7 engaged with these companies so that we can help them grow. It's a big commitment from them. It's a big commitment from us, but it's a part of the discipline that we think we need to generate the returns to the people who have entrusted us with capital.
No, absolutely. And I totally agree with you on the power of focus, and also on being deeply entrenched, because I'm sure the little that I know of you, like you've had so many years of experiences with so many companies, that all these companies will benefit from that richness that comes along with the gray hair as well, even if it came hereditary.
At least I've learned a few things along the way, which I hope I can, and I'm very willing to, I honestly, genuinely find the work that I'm doing now very fulfilling. Sometimes a bit frustrating, but in general, very fulfilling, because it gives you the chance to work, as you said, with with people who have high energy levels, of good ideas, and are generally very open to those ideas. And then so it also, all of this helps my energy levels as well, which is important.
Absolutely. You've almost tempted me. Maybe in 5 years' time, I'm joining you. Like I'm pooling my resources, and because it's so much fun. Even when I look at the little work that I do, I normally keep a day a week relatively free on my calendar if anybody wants to reach out and just have a chat. And thankfully, I have many people, and similar to you, it's a similar experience. They have like the young have so many ideas, and yeah, some of them are like iffy, but lots of them have great energy, and they're
Yeah.
looking for direction, and it's great to kind of chat with them. And I just saw the time, and I know that your time is limited as well, so
We've been
it takes
chatting.
me
We've
to
been
my.
chatting for quite a while. Exactly.
I know, for a while.
It's been very enjoyable, actually. And I've got to say one
Thank
thing.
you,
One thing
thank you
that
for that.
you said that
Please,
which
please.
is important for me, which is exactly that to me there's no such thing as a bad idea, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, people have got passion around an idea, and it's a little bit about figuring out, okay, how can that be refined? How can that be tweaked? How can that be executed effectively? I think that's what. And so more, I think I agree with you, and I do the same thing. I try to keep, actually today in the week, I always keep my Fridays quite free, which is about trying to just have time to think. The guy that I mentioned to you, who was outrageously successful in the investment business, he always said, you need to, as an individual and in the world in general, but particularly in our busy lives, you just need hours to yourself, no social media, no telephones, no, just time to think. And I think that's hopefully some good closing advice.
Yeah, no, and it's Fridays for me too. So, we're meeting on the right day when our calendars are relatively open. So, my final two questions to you, David. You said you're 63. That means that I can give you a timeline of 7 years. So, okay, so let's do it like this. You are kind of trying to change the world by providing us humankind with alternative biomaterials. So if you were to gaze in a crystal ball and you are 70, what is the scale that you would imagine? What would you like to see in 7 years? We today produce whatever, a billion tons of petroleum polymers, so in terms of, maybe we stick to tons. You and I understand the language
We
of
understand
tons.
tons too much,
So,
exactly.
so what is it? What is your dream in the next 7 years, that this is what I would really love to have achieved?
Somehow I would relate it to these. I think the number today of, and this is all a bit difficult to define, but call it, there's half a billion tons of plastic in some form or other running around the place. 7 years is not very long. I'm trying to think what's a realistic goal. I would view it in terms of just on this. Just if I just focus just on the plastics issue, because again, it's the easiest thing to just think about. Because I think we can think about this. We want to have more we want to have more wooden buildings. We want to have greater use of sort of less use of things like cement and ceramics and all. So there's lots of things like that, but if I just think about this in the world of plastics, if we could achieve a 30 to 40% reduction in the use of plastics, don't keep me to the 7-year time, but it's sort of 30 to 40% within a decent time horizon. And by the way, the projection is the other way, right? The projection is we're going to double,
We're going to
by
grow
sort of
even
a
more.
2040-ish, we're going to double, right? Over whatever that is, if we are able to achieve a 30 to 40% reduction in the use of plastics, not necessarily from the baseline today, but from just in general, I think that would be an outrageously good achievement for all of us, for the environment, for not just for the startup, but just for people, humanity in general, because it would hit us in the towards the world of just being much more conscious of what's going into our ecosystem. So to my target is that's what sort of I have in my mind is sort of a quantifiably large reduction in the use of plastics, and we can start. All of us can start by simply being a lot more on that journey, by being a lot more conscious about the way we consume things and what we're consuming and how we're packaging them and how we're wrapping up. What I find a little bit concerning always is that we go, well, it's the brand owner's fault, or it's the industry's fault, or it's actually our behavior, I mean, brand owners respond to our behavior, right? I mean, they're in the business of making money based upon our behavior. So they respond based upon our, so we have to change, right? We have to change. And in some parts of the world, that's very difficult. That's difficult to change. In some parts of the world, it's actually quite easy to change. I live in a country like Finland, in Scandinavia in general, where those changes should be quite easy, right? In Europe in general, you could say in general, Europe should be able to change quite easily. It's more difficult, I appreciate, in certain other countries, in continents. But I think it comes down to us making those decisions to change. And that can achieve, I think, quite a substantial reduction in the use of plastics. And because the brand owners and the converters and all the rest of the industry will respond to that. And then we're going to get the price right. What's so disappointing in this debate has been the lack of the governments to be able to, and the UN, to coalesce around a very simple set of actions in terms of this plastic reduction. And I think the problem with those large organizations is they're trying to solve far too big a problem, and at the same time they are also working towards what I would call lowest common denominator politics, which means that you're trying to make everybody happy, and everybody is not going to be happy in this discussion. And so I think we've got to sort of tackle this problem on a lot more structured basis. But that would be my super dream, is that we just have a substantial reduction. But notice I say, I try to be practical, right? I'm not, we're not saying, because somebody could say, oh, we eliminate plastics. It's just not. Let's just be real. That's just not going to happen. And we shouldn't, because they have. But what we can do is substantially change the way that we behave, and therefore substantially the way that we consumers consume plastics. And then the industry will get the message.
And I truly respect your answer on multiple levels. And it's not like, somebody can say, oh, we are going to create 100 million tons of biomaterials, but you are still activating consumption, right? And the biomaterial
exactly.
also have certain amount of energy, certain amount of, base materials, etc. So I like that you didn't take that angle and you decided that, it is overall reduction. Now, it could be through replacement, or it could be through habit change, or it could be just reduction of weight, or whatever, it is multiple
all
facets.
those things.
It could be 30-40% is huge. Yeah. No, great. Thank you so much,
all those things. And I think that's a really good observation, because that's exactly what I mean. Because actually there's one thing we also should be conscious of, is we just consume too much stuff, right? We consume too much unnecessary stuff. And so changing that habit's part of this, part of that goal. So thanks for the clarification.
I was exposed. I've lived in US for 5 years, and I shifted from India, and it's horrendous. For somebody who calls themselves poor doesn't have space in their house because they have so much stuff. Like everywhere you step, it's amazing, and most of it is not really needed. It's for some excuse, but okay, we will park that for another time. But that rant. But let me take you to my last question. What does good garbage mean to you?
You see, you leave the tricky questions to last. So first of all, to me, good garbage is something. So if I think about three angles: value and environment and social. So on the environmental side, good garbage is stuff that we can either disappears, not necessarily disappears into the air, but disappears in terms of compostability and or we are able to recycle, transform, to be able to, or that we're able to reuse, right? So I go, it either disappears, it composts, it leaves no trace. By the way, one company, it's called Traceless for exactly that reason, leaves no trace. Secondly, it can be retransformed, recycled, can be reused in its existing form or in some form, right? And that process of retransformation is economically viable and environmentally compatible with what we're trying to achieve, right? And I think that to me is what good waste is. Good waste also, and it links the economics to the social, good waste also is something which has value, right? And when I say value, it facilitates the collection process. It facilitates and the economic well-being of those people in the value chain. And I think particularly, obviously, India is a good example, but there are many other examples that you're transforming through the management of waste. You're transforming and you're creating economic value. And I think that's important to bring in, because that economic value has also social consequences. So I think it's, yeah, to me, good waste is exactly, so it's that it's waste which can be dealt with by the environment and can be reused, particularly therefore reducing future need. At the same time, also is creating some level of economic value in that whole transformation process. The whole sort of waste management system is such that it needs to be developed a lot. I mean, we haven't developed the whole waste management system sufficiently, and it's got to create economic value, and that's the whole understanding of good waste. Good waste, and from a management perspective, is there's a lot of work to do around that. But we're not recycling half enough. I mean, of what we need to.
Oh, thank
but
you,
that's
David.
a whole topic for another day.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't want to delve into recycling, so we're going to stop there. All good things have to come to an end, but I don't think this is the end. I'm sure we are going to continue and have multiple conversations and learning. David, it's such a joy. I think each time I meet you, I come out wiser, and this is over the last 25 years. I guess we've just met in person 4 or 5 times, but it's been a joy each time. And I think I met you when you were with Pöyry and then Macquarie, and now that you're running your own fund, and I'm excited to join you in the future. That is my new learning this time. If you give me a job like a good plan at some point, then I'm going to throw in my hat and say, David, let's build this together, coming from the fiber business to biomaterials and building a strong future. So thank you so much for taking so much time off your busy schedule and talking to us. I'm sure everybody who listens will be richer in their knowledge and hopefully build better and better biomaterial businesses. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun. And again, I love the format of this. This is a nice way just to chat about life in general. So really happy to have been here, and thanks for inviting me. And I hope people would maybe pick up one or two thoughts that may be useful for the future. Great talking.